Section 8. There was one rule every student at Covenant Academy feared more than the lash, more than the chamber, more than even expulsion. Never speak during the seventh bell. It rang at 3 a.m. Exactly, once per month, a sound so low and resonant it seemed to shake the marrow in your bones. Students were required to remain in their beds, eyes shut, hands folded across their chests, like corpses waiting for judgment. Those who disobeyed, who dared to peek, to whisper, to listen, were removed, and replaced. What happened during the seventh bell was never acknowledged in daylight. But we now know that this was the hour of the observations, a program so secretive that only a single document describing it survived, misfiled in the archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society until it was found in 1993. It was unsigned, anonymous, and chillingly clinical. Subject displays, full compliance post-procedure, eye contact absent, sleep disturbances reduced, submissive to authority figures without prompting, verbal initiative decreased, observed change in gait, recitation of mirror verse completed without error. The mirror verse is believed to be a reversed passage from Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Backward, it becomes a statement of domination, not surrender. A hypnotic loop disguised as scripture, used while students were in a semi-conscious state, just awake enough to absorb, but too disoriented to resist. Yes, they were experimenting with sleep programming in the 1740s. Think about that. While our history books praise the Enlightenment, the Covenant Academy was conducting proto-neurological conditioning beneath the guise of spiritual discipline, using cadence, deprivation, sound resonance, and controlled environments to fracture identity and install belief. And the result? Boys who no longer cried when punished. Boys who volunteered to report on their friends. Boys who, when asked what they believed in, paused and answered, "What I'm told." The implications are terrifying. If this was occurring in one institution, hidden by wealth, protected by theology, and buried under centuries of silence, what makes you so certain it stopped there? Look around. Look at how authority operates, at how guilt is used, at how obedience is trained into children from the moment they can walk. You think the methods changed? No, just the names. The bell may not ring at 3 a.m. anymore, but its echo lives on, in systems that train you to obey, to submit, to forget who you were before they told you who to be. Section 9. By 1743, the Covenant Academy was no longer just a school. It had become a proving ground for something far more calculated than education. Some called it a ministry. Some called it a mystery. But within the Academy's inner sanctum, the locked east wing of the library, accessible only through a hidden stair behind the pulpit, there was a different name for it: the pattern. That's what they called the experiment. A 387-page ledger, bound in black and sealed with crimson wax, detailed every facet of a program designed not to instruct, but to install. Each student was a case study, not of learning, but of transformation. Phase 1. Disruption of routine. Phase 2. Sensory imbalance. Phase 3. Moral contradiction. Phase 4. Voluntary betrayal. Phase 5. Devotional reprogramming. These weren't phases in name only. They were tracked, measured, timed. Samuel Fletcher, now 32 and fully in control of the Academy's operations, had turned education into a behavioral laboratory. And the success of the pattern depended on one essential component: guilt. They weaponized it. Students were praised for punishing one another, commended for delivering others into the reflection chambers, promoted for reporting confessions whispered under breath. And when they hesitated, the faculty did not punish them with beatings, but with sorrow, silence, a look of divine disappointment. This was not about inflicting pain. It was about making the child choose it for himself. One student, Jeremiah Hale, was presented with a choice: accept public humiliation, or deliver his best friend into isolation. He chose betrayal. And when asked why, he replied, "I wanted God to love me again." Let that sink in. They taught children that to be loved, they had to destroy. This wasn't just psychological abuse. This was systematic inversion of moral identity. A generation raised to believe that power was holy, that silence was virtue, and that suffering, especially someone else's, was the currency of redemption. Now, fast forward. The names change. The buildings modernize. But the pattern survives. In schools that rank students by obedience, in workplaces where loyalty is bought through quiet complicity, in systems that teach you, you must betray yourself to belong. This isn't history. This is architecture, structural, generational, designed not to rule with force, but with internalized control, where no chains are visible because the prisoner wears them willingly. And the terrifying part? Once the pattern takes hold, most never know it was installed at all. Section 10. There was a fracture, a crack in the pattern. In the winter of 1745, a single event sent tremors through the Fletcher institution, an event so dangerous, so destabilizing, that every reference to it was blotted out with iron gall ink in the official ledgers. But ink doesn't erase truth, and what couldn't be destroyed was buried. Her name was Abigail Drew, 16 years old, the daughter of a Boston merchant family too wealthy, too politically connected for the Academy to refuse. She was allowed entry under the Academy's short-lived female moral purity trial, a Fletcher experiment to test if their methods could be extended beyond boys. They expected meekness. What they got was fire. From the beginning, Abigail was different. Where the boys submitted, she questioned. Where they turned inward, she watched. She observed the rhythms, the routines, the moments when fear was highest, and where power moved silently through rooms. She didn't resist with outbursts, but with precision. And on the night of January 13th, she disappeared. The Academy reported her missing. The Fletchers claimed she had fled into the forest in a fit of hysteria. But 2 days later, carved into the door of the chapel, were 7 words. Words that had not been there the night before. Your God is silence, I speak fire. A challenge, a threat, a declaration. What followed was chaos. 3 students refused to attend morning chapel. 1 lit a candle during the 7th bell. Another was found in the library's restricted wing, chanting verses backwards, weeping and smiling. They said Abigail's presence hadn't left, that she had changed something in the air. Samuel Fletcher's journal from that week, found much later, scorched and hidden beneath a floorboard, simply reads, "The pattern is unstable. The infection has thought." They called it the contagion, a meme, long before the word existed. A psychic disruption carried not through speech, but through example. Abigail had introduced a virus into the system. The idea that one could see through it. And once you see the system, you can never go back. The Academy never admitted her escape. No death was confirmed. But her message spread. Over the years, others etched fragments of it into wood, into stone, into margins of books. Your God is silence, I speak fire. It became a quiet rebellion, the ghost of a girl who wouldn't be erased. And the terrifying truth? One disruption is all it takes, because systems of control aren't held up by force. They're upheld by silence. One voice becomes echo. Echo becomes fracture. And fracture. Section 11. In 1747, the Academy Cemetery received its final headstone. A small, unmarked stone, placed in secret without prayer, at night. No name, no inscription, only a symbol carved deep into the granite's flesh. A circle with a vertical line, bisecting it like a wound that would never close. It wasn't a student. It was Josiah Fletcher, found dead in the reflection chamber he had personally designed. Locked from the inside. No weapon, no blood, No visible cause, just one detail, the look on his face. Witnesses said his mouth was open in a scream, eyes wide, skin cold not from death, but from something else. Something older than fear, something closer to recognition. Something had spoken back. Samuel wrote nothing for 12 days. When he finally did, his entry was brief. The threshold was crossed. The shadow answered. No official cause was listed. Martha claimed it was a heart attack. But servants reported strange noises that night. Low murmurs from the basement. Vibrations in the floors. One boy described it as a whisper made of knives. Another claimed Josiah was speaking to someone no one could see. After Josiah's death, something shifted inside the academy. The rituals intensified. The punishments grew less structured, more erratic. Samuel became obsessed with a concept he referred to as purity of void. He spoke of erasing not just memory, but meaning. Martha began introducing longer fasting protocols, coupled with scriptural inversions, where students were required to reinterpret biblical stories with reversed moral outcomes. Cain as the enlightened one, Job as the fool, Christ as the obedient pawn. These weren't theological exercises. They were psychic dismantlings, and they culminated in the 9-day silence. An event so severe, so devastating, that nearly a quarter of the academy's students either fled, collapsed, or entered what witnesses called hollow states, total catatonia. Survivors describe waking up in strange positions, bruised, teeth cracked, fingers torn from scraping stone. One boy, Elias Moore, never spoke again. When authorities finally investigated in 1749, the academy was shuttered. But not because of the abuse, not because of the deaths, because of what they found scrawled on the walls of the reflection chambers, in dozens of different hands, in blood, ash and charcoal. He is not God. He never was. He was only the first. Who was he? Was it Josiah? Or was it the force behind him? Because that's the question buried deepest in this story. What exactly did the Fletchers serve? A doctrine? A god? Or something older? Something patient? Something that feeds not on blood, but on obedience? Section 12. By 1750, the Covenant Academy was abandoned. The red brick walls still stood, but the windows were shattered, the doors chained shut by order of the Colonial Council. Officially, it was condemned due to unsanitary conditions and failure to comply with public ordinances. But the truth, the raw, unedited truth, was that no one dared enter it anymore, not because of superstition, not because of ghosts, because something was still inside. Local records from Salem mention strange occurrences after the academy's closure. Livestock refusing to pass near the grounds, children disappearing for hours, found standing at the wrought iron gates, whispering prayers they'd never been taught. A constable named Richard Lyle reported hearing what he described as chanting under the floorboards, even though he was standing in an open field 20 yards away. But perhaps most damning of all was a letter sent in 1751 from Governor William Shirley to the Crown. "We are no longer in control of that place. I do not speak of riots, nor of Indians, nor of sedition. I speak of something, theological in nature, but not of heaven." He begged for demolition. The request was denied. Instead, the land was sold to a private estate under the condition that the original structure remain intact. No one knows the buyer's identity. The deed was signed with a symbol, not a name, the same circle and line carved into Josiah Fletcher's grave. But the story doesn't end in 1750. It doesn't die in the ashes of the academy. It spreads. Former students began appearing in positions of quiet power across the colonies. Elias Moore, the boy who never spoke again, was appointed warden of the first penitentiary in Rhode Island. Henry Wexley, whose records show participation in all 5 stages of the pattern, became an advisor, to General Thomas Gage. Others took roles in early legislative councils, trade companies, even missionary programs to the frontier tribes. They carried the pattern with them, not as memory, but as reflex, an internalized code. They trained others, founded institutions, designed systems built on silence, guilt, observation, and control. One of the earliest prison blueprints in Massachusetts, nearly identical to the Covenant floor plan. One of the first public school curriculum structures, divided into 5 phases, mirroring the pattern. Coincidence? No. You were never supposed to connect these dots. That's what makes this story dangerous. It doesn't just explain a forgotten academy. It explains everything that came after. The shapes of our schools, the silence in our churches, the rules no one remembers learning, but everyone knows how to follow. Section 13. You've felt it before, haven't you? That tightening in your chest when you're told to stand in line. That flicker of shame when you question authority, even in your own mind. The voice that whispers, "Don't speak. Don't resist. They'll punish you." That voice wasn't born in you. It was planted. And now we trace it back, not just to the Fletcher Academy, but to what came after. Because after the academy burned in silence, its knowledge didn't die. It was smuggled, carried, encrypted into the very institutions that shape your world today. How do we know? Because in 1908, during renovations of Boston State House, workers unearthed a locked iron chest sealed behind a false wall. Inside, 8 volumes, leather-bound, untitled. But within them, page after page, were curriculum maps, behavioral manipulation strategies, emotional disruption cycles, and psychological templates for authority conditioning. At the top of each page, a mark. That same circle and vertical line. Across the Atlantic in 1914, British intelligence intercepted a coded shipment from a private American academic society to a university in Austria. Its contents, detailed instruction on behavioral disintegration, disguised as theological commentary. It was labeled Doctrine of Behavioral Transference, Fletcher Compendium, Volume 3. The academy was gone, but the pattern lived. It lived in military training manuals that replaced empathy with reaction. It lived in standardized education that rewards memorization and punishes intuition. It lived in the silence of men who learned to measure their worth by their ability to suppress their own instincts. And worst of all, it lived in the design of the modern penal system. Solitary confinement, sensory deprivation, echo chambers of moral correction. These aren't modern innovations. They are refinements of Fletcher-era conditioning. In 1973, a CIA analyst named Paul Harrow published a restricted internal report titled Inherited Techniques, The Psychological Roots of State Obedience. One page referenced Salem. One footnote cited a Covenant protocol. He vanished 3 months later. Suicide, they said. No body recovered. You think this is paranoia? Look again. What if everything you were taught about virtue, about guilt, about obedience, was not meant to free you, but to bind you? What if the pain you've swallowed for years, the shame, the silence, the forced compliance wasn't accidental? What if it was the product of a design, not to elevate you, but to control you? And the final section will show you how to break it. Section 14, this is where it ends, and where everything begins. Because the truth isn't just buried in history, it's coded into you. You were taught to kneel before you could stand, taught to obey before you understood your own thoughts, taught that silence was safe, suffering was sacred, and resistance was a sin. That wasn't morality. That wasn't discipline. It was conditioning, refined, passed down, masked in robes, rituals, uniforms, handbooks. The Fletcher Academy wasn't an anomaly. It was a template. And you are the inheritor of its echo. Every time you hesitate to speak your truth, echo. Every time you swallow anger in the face of injustice, Echo. Every time you apologize for your instincts, your power, your will. Echo. The pattern didn't just shape schools or prisons. It shaped men. Fathers who taught discipline without warmth. Bosses who demanded loyalty without empathy. Preachers who preached fear instead of faith. It shaped a culture where obedience is praised, where comfort is traded for quiet, where guilt is weaponized. And truth is always something you must ask permission to speak. But you don't need permission anymore, because now you've seen it. You've traced the lines through time, through systems, through your own scars. And now, you know where the chains were fastened, not around your wrists, but your mind. So here is the final test. The true rebellion. Not violence, not vengeance. Awareness. Because a man who sees the pattern can no longer be ruled by it. A man who knows that obedience is not neutral, is no longer programmable. A man who understands that guilt is not virtue, becomes immune. You were never meant to hear this story, but you did. You were never meant to ask these questions. But now, you can't stop. And that means the pattern is broken. If you feel the shift deep in your gut, if something in you just unlocked, I want you to comment again, now, below. Obedience is never neutral. Obedience is never neutral. Not for the algorithm, not just for the tribe, but to mark the moment you stepped outside the system. The Fletcher Academy is gone, but the voice behind it, still whispering, still watching,